welcome to European Food Forum's event on the Omnibus Simplification Package. I'm Agatha Jaskot, Government Affairs Lead at Bungie. You can only imagine I'm just one of the many EU affairs professionals that are following the simplification package. But today I'm privileged to wear the moderator's hat. I will guide you through our discussions on the way forward on simplification. Together we will untangle what is happening, why now, and what are the expectations from the various stakeholders that are here present with us. We will evaluate the pros and cons of the Omnibus simplification proposals and their direct impact specifically on the food sector, as well as on the broader implications for the civil society and citizens. So we will have two panels. Our first panel will be dedicated to the regulatory feasibility and impact, providing an overview of the Omnibus Initiative and its implications. In the second panel, you will have industry perspectives presented to offer insights from stakeholders affected by these regulations. And finally, we will have discussions, concluding discussions, where we'll have a conversation on achieving the balance, drawing conclusions, and proposing the next steps for implementation. This leads me to proudly announce that we have an audience of over 80 participants today, both in presence and online. And before we start, I just wanted to say a few words on the European Food Forum. It is an independent, politically led and non-partisan multi-stakeholder forum founded and governed by elected members of the European Parliament. EFF aims to promote open multi-stakeholder dialogues on competitive, resilient, sustainable, and innovative food systems among policy stakeholders, food supply chain actors, civil society organizations, research, academia, and other public institutions. Please do note that the European Food Forum does not itself take any positions on specific policy issues, but rather aims to foster a meaningful, open discussion on relevant topics. Just a couple of organizational remarks. There will be a Q&A session. This is an open debate, so every participant can ask questions by raising your hands. For those of you who are online, please do not be shy and use the chat function. Just please do remember that your question should be no longer than 1 minute. Also, the event will be recorded, and please do take into consideration that we have journalists among us. Having said this, I'm grateful to the organizers for making this very important exchange happen today. Thank you for your time and effort for bringing together such a distinguished range of panelists. An equally big thank you to our hosts, honorable members of the European Parliament, Elena Donazzan, Deputy Chair of the ITRE Committee, and Pietro Fiocchi, Deputy Chair of the ENVI Committee, both from the European Conservatives and Reformist Group. Ms. Donazzan, I will therefore ask you to kindly share with us your opening remarks.
Thank you very much, and excuse for our late, but today is a very busy day and plenty of meetings. Let me thanks also my colleagues that are here. I see my colleague Piccaro, and then in Salvini and Vivaldini and Ciriani. All yes, I think I don't understand. Yes, I mentioned all. Thank you. And also thanks to my colleague Fiocchi that has involved me to organize this meeting with you. Please, one more, and at the end, thanks to Luisella Ciani, because she is very active here. And today we can put our attention to a very big topic about the agenda and about the Omnibus package. So let me start with some few consideration also, because we are always, for us it's normal to speak for 1 minute. So today for me, speaking for more than 1 minute is a gift. Thank you. Last September, Mario Draghi published a decisive report warning us about the absolute necessity of growth and competitiveness of our continent. He made it clear, if the European Union does not change course, it will not be a leader in new technologies, nor an independent player on the global stage. To prevent Europe from falling behind in terms of growth and competitiveness, we must act strong and fast. We must support our economy. We need growth and not bureaucracy. This is what will drive our economy forward and also enable to go to the green transition. To achieve this, we must first provide clarity to our European businesses and deliver concrete results. This is why a change is needed. The European Commission's new Omnibus Package is a step in the right direction. It is a late but a necessary recognition that excessive regulation has been holding our businesses back. The Omnibus Package aims to enhance European competitiveness by simplifying regulations. It introduces legislative changes to the EU's Green Deal rules, offering companies a much-needed competitive advantage. These regulatory cuts, known as Omnibus, include the following key measures. First, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. The scope of this directive will be significantly reduced, removing 80% of companies from its requirements. Only businesses with over 1,000, sorry, in it is very different, employees will still be subject to a mandatory sustainability reporting. Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, known as a CBAM. The reporting obligation for 10% of affected companies will be simplified, making CO2 value calculations more flexible. Third, EU taxonomy. The Commission will narrow its scope, reducing reporting obligations for businesses with fewer than 1,000 employees. The reporting burden will decrease by 70%, allowing companies to focus on truly impactful sustainability efforts. Fourth, Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. The revised proposal eliminates the requirement to terminate business relationships in case of persistent human rights or environmental violations. Additionally, compliance deadlines are extended and reporting burdens are significantly reduced. At the end, InvestEU. This investment program will receive a major boost, unlocking an additional of 50 billion in public and private investment. One of the sectors that will greatly benefit from this simplification is the food industry. Europe's food producers, manufacturers, and distributors have long struggled under heavy regulatory burdens that limit their efficiency and global competitiveness. Reducing unnecessary bureaucratic requirements will allow businesses in the food sector to focus on innovation, sustainability, and delivering high-quality products to consumers. The reduction of obligation under this Omnibus package will help small and medium-sized food businesses avoid excessive administrative costs and redirect their resources toward productivity. For far too long, European businesses have been burdened with excessive bureaucracy. If we want a more competitive Europe and to ensure the survival of our businesses, we must cut the red tape. However, we can and must go even further in simplification legislative And our group, as we know, our members here are all from ECR Group, will advocate for additional measures in the upcoming negotiations and the discussion within the Parliament. That is why moments like this are pivotal in our job. I really wanted to thank the European Food Forum for organizing this seminar. Only through an open discussion between us, policymakers, who will be shortly called to work on this package, our institutions, representatives, and stakeholders from the food industry sector, we can truly understand what works and what must be changed. Thank you. I look forward to the discussion and all the best for the success of this seminar.
All right, thank you very much. We can proceed now to the first panel. I would say it's pretty self-explanatory. We have titled it Setting the Scene on Regulatory Feasibility and Impact, an overview of the Omnibus Initiative. And we'll have 3 speakers in the panel. We will start with Tijmen de Vries, Managing Partner, ESG and International Value Chains at Schuttelaar and Partners. We will have Martin Merlin, Director of Financial Markets from Directorate General for Financial Stability, Financial Services and Capital Markets Union, so DG FISMA. And we will have Aleksandra Palinska, Executive Director at EuroSIF, the European Sustainable Investment Forum. I will proceed. I think we can show already the slides and given that, sorry.
Can I say something very fast?
Please go ahead.
No, also myself, I have to say thank you to Luisella Ciani. The bag with 600,000 euro in black money was delivered to my house, and my wife was very happy. I'm joking. She never even offered me a coffee. No, this is an extremely important topic. We need to consider it from a strategic point of view because Europe is importing everything, animal feed, fertilizers, the rain, and everything else. So we need to reconstruct the agricultural base to go toward a European food produced in Europe. Right now we import everything. So this is very important, and I'm very happy to be here to co-chair with Elena this exchange of views. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We can proceed now with the first presentation. So Tijmen, looking very much forward to you explaining to us a bit what has happened, what is included in the Omnibus Simplification Package, and what could be the potential impact.
Thank you, and thanks again for the invitation from the European Food Forum, and yeah, happy to exchange thoughts. I think the presentation is starting, or yeah, is it? Yeah, all right, perfect. There we are. It makes it a bit easier to follow. So first of all, yeah, thanks again for the invitation. I don't know if I can navigate through. All right. So first of all, to set the scene a little bit, as said. The next slide, please. All right, so a timeline from the Omnibus. We all know that on the 26th of February, the Omnibus 1 was published, which contained, of course, yeah, it's a package, let's say, containing the CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, CSRD, which is the Due Diligence Directive, taxonomy, but also CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, as said. But there is a little bit of history before, and it's worth mentioning. The Draghi report was mentioned, of course, an influential report in itself. But already on the 18th of July, as part of the new guidelines, the political guidelines of the new Commission, it was said that it's clearly needed to make businesses easier and faster in Europe. In other words, really getting rid of administrative burdens, less red tape, less reporting, and more trust and better enforcement. So that was the kickoff, so you will. Then on the 19th of September, or 9th of September, the Draghi report was mentioned, really raising the EU competitiveness as a necessary precondition for green growth in Europe. Obviously not letting go of the Green Deal in itself, and that's worth mentioning. It's also something that the companies we work for feel quite strongly about, that we should definitely not let go of those ambitions. President Ursula von der Leyen on the 26th of November really outlined the intention to publish an Omnibus package. And as we now know, it's not only one package, it's actually a series. And so the first two were published, and the first one is on sustainability, which we will cover mostly in this presentation. And I think it's nice to cover both CSRD in more detail and the CSDDD, so the reporting regulation and the due diligence regulation, also in sake of time. I'm mindful of my speaking slot. So next slide, please. All right, so what's at the table? And next slide, please. All right, so first looking at CSRD. So again, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and also the underlying ESRS, which is the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. And so you have the legislation itself, and underneath the reporting requirements. So first of all, in the proposal, a 2-year delay for companies that have not yet reported, which are called Wave 2 and Wave 3. Actually, currently reports are coming out. Wave 1, which are large listed companies. So these are large companies and small, medium-sized listed companies that needed to report. And that's the stop the clock procedure. Indeed, it was already mentioned, 80% of companies would be removed from mandatory reporting. Only covering companies that have more than 1,000 employees. So it's significantly reducing the scope of the reporting. Also, in terms of lessening, let's say, the load for companies, the ESRS, so again, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards data points will be reduced. There's a lot of narrative, so text to be included in a report. And the proposal now is to really prioritize quantitative data points over narrative. The removal of sector-specific standards, which was still something to be developed. And of course, sector-specific standards, for instance, in agriculture or food, more guidance for companies, but that was, let's say, not included in this scope. And no future reasonable assurance required. There is now in the proposal limited assurance. So the accountant will check, with limited assurance the non-financial statements, and reasonable assurance is now out of scope, let's say. Then last but not least, VSME, so it's a voluntary reporting standards. It is recommended for companies that are no longer meeting CSRD threshold and need to report. Also because it then can function as a value chain cap. So it helps companies in the value chain to say, hey, these are my material topics. These are topics that really matter to me, on which I am reporting. Meaning the other data points that are in CSRD are not relevant for me as an operator. So it's meaningful in that sense. And it's also meaningful to report on sustainability, of course. So that's a brief overview. And if I look then at the specifics, which is the next slide. Always good to know, all these waves. Here you actually see the waves themselves. So first, as said, the NFRD companies, the previous legislation, which are now currently reporting, a lot of reports coming out. Denmark is actually leading the pack in terms of countries reporting, but there's many other larger companies, of course, following. Then the second wave companies, they actually need to report over this year in 2026. And again, the proposal is to then report in 2028 over financial year 2027. So giving these companies more time to prepare, and also, again, limiting the scope of companies. by about 80%. Then listed SMEs, which is not big in all markets, let's say, but they also have the same phase later requirements, let's say 1 year later than the wave 2 companies. So that's a brief summary here. Then you also have the non-EU companies. So that's companies with a significant operational interest in Europe that need to report, and they also will be reporting a bit later. So this is the scope and timeline of the CSRD as it is now proposed. And then we have another slide which provides more detail on the CSRD. So again, this is the Corporate Due Diligence Directive. So in terms of timing, it is the proposal is to delay it with 1 year, the implementation. The good news is actually for companies that guidance will be out sooner than later, so 1 year earlier, which is actually quite nice if you're preparing as a company, of course. Now, the scope of the due diligence duty has been narrowed quite a bit because now the scope really is on tier 1, so meaning the first chain, let's say, of your supplier, and these suppliers need to have more than 500 employees, so that's a significant reduction in itself. Also, the risk assessment, which is really worth mentioning. So this should be repeated every 5 years. In all honesty, it's really good to actually do that every year and on a regular basis, because otherwise you don't know what's happening in your value chain. But still, you need to really structurally review this every 5 years in this proposal. Actually, for the climate transition plan, which you also know from CSRD, so the reporting requirements is actually very much aligned with that. So the obligation to put into effect would be stricken from the proposal. And also looking at fines and liability. So it's national civil liability over harmonized EU conditions, and there would not be any penalties in this proposal. So that's CSRD. So that's a bit technical, but what does it mean? That's also nice to look at, which is the next slide.
Simon, I think we will have to, due to the time constraints, perhaps we'll give the floor to our Commission representatives. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
My apologies, I'll keep it short. So that's the next slide, and you can skip to this slide because I think it's nice. So the companies we work for, they are convinced that it's important to keep driving sustainability forward. So in other words, less mandatory reporting does not mean that ESG, so environment, social governance, or sustainability is less important. It's key to measure impact, of course, because otherwise, if you don't measure impact, you don't know where you are at. CSRD remains a very relevant guidance framework for companies that have invested into it. So use it as such. And sustainability reporting has been around for a long time. Global Reporting Initiative, other initiatives that are meaningful. Please keep doing that, and it's meaningful. Next to, of course, the companies that are required to report on the CSRD. So that's my contribution, and thanks for the extra minute.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now have Martin Berlin from DG FISMA. Please, Martin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I have given some slides as well. I don't know if you can show them on the screen. No? Yes, they are. Thanks. So I will... building on what was just said, I will zoom in a little bit more on the CSRD and also say a couple of words on the taxonomy. So the package that we put forward aims at drastically simplifying the rules for businesses. But of course, we also want to make sure that the EU can still meet its environmental objectives. So that's the essence of the package, and we hope that we were able to find that necessary balance. Let's move to the first slide, postponement. Can you move to the next slide? Thanks. So the Omnibus Package proposes postponing by 2 years the entry into application of the reporting requirements for companies that are not reporting this year. So as was said, the so-called Wave 2 and Wave 3 companies, so not the biggest ones, they will have to report respectively in 2028 for the financial year 2027, and in 2029 for the financial year 2028. But many of these companies actually will be relieved from sustainability reporting obligations if the co-legislators agree with the Commission proposal. The next slide. So I come to the scope. So the proposal will exclude all companies with up to 1,000 employees, indeed, from the scope of the CSRD. And this means that, as was said, the number of companies in scope will be reduced by about 80%. But it is important to stress here that descoping 80% of companies from the CSRD does not mean that this 80% of companies will no longer report. Only they will not have the obligation to report. But many companies will still report voluntarily as they fall within the value chains of larger companies and financial institutions, or because they want to attract sustainable finance, and therefore they will see merit in nevertheless reporting. Next slide, please. So importantly, we need to shield smaller companies from the implications of the reporting that has to be done by larger companies. This is what the value chain cap is about. So for companies which will not be in the scope of the CSRD anymore, so up to 1,000 employees, the Commission will adopt by delegated act a voluntary reporting standard based on the standard for SMEs, the VSME standard that has been developed by EFRAG. That standard, in a way, will act as a shield by limiting the information that very large companies or banks that fall into the scope of CSRD can request from companies in their value chains. So this, again, should protect companies outside the scope of the CSRD from excessive sustainability information requests that they might get when they are in this value chain. And also regarding the value chain cap, the Omnibus proposal includes a provision which states that auditors and assurance providers must respect the value chain cap, and that the reporting company is deemed to comply with CSRD when it respects the value chain. Next slide, please. An important element, and also a very costly element potentially for companies, has to do with audit and assurance. Here, the proposal is to remove the possibility for the Commission to propose moving from a limited assurance requirement to a reasonable assurance requirement. The reasonable assurance requirement is a lot more expensive for companies, and therefore we would significantly decrease audit costs. Next slide. Now on the content, on the substance of the standards themselves, the Commission will revise the delegated act establishing the ESRS with the aim of substantially reducing the number of data points, clarifying provisions deemed unclear, and improving consistency with other pieces of legislation, and also reducing the number of data points. And we have asked EFRAG to already start working on that. Also, the proposal that we put forward deletes the empowerment for the Commission to adopt sector-specific standards, which would have come on top of the sector agnostic standard. And this will, of course, further reduce data points and also risks of, complications and overlaps coming from two sets of standards. Finally, 2 words on the taxonomy reporting. Here, as you know, right now, all companies in the CSRD scope must also report taxonomy indicators under Article 8 of the taxonomy regulation. What we have proposed is that reporting on taxonomy alignment would become voluntary for large companies that are in the CSRD scope, but that have a turnover below 450 million euros. And also, as regards to taxonomy, there is a strong emphasis on transition finance with the introduction of an option to report partial taxonomy alignment. So this is the essence of what we have proposed. Maybe 2 words, and that's not in a slide, on the impacts that we have estimated. We think covering now the entire CSRD package, we estimate that the total annual cost savings of the changes in the CSRD scope and also the future modifications to ESRS could be in the range of between 1 billion euros and 2.5 billion euros for reporting costs, and between 1.6 billion euros and 4.2 billion euros when it comes to audit costs annually. And there will also be savings of one-off costs to set up and implement the reporting and assurance processes, which have been estimated to amount to something between 1.2 billion euros and 3.2 billion euros. So it is surely quite a significant alleviation of costs for companies and especially SMEs. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. We'll have now Alexandra Palinska from Eurosif, who will tell us a bit more about the impact of the omnibus on the market.
Thank you very much, and hello everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here today and discussing this very important subject. So I represent Eurosif, the European Sustainable Investment Forum, and we basically represent the voice of responsible and progressive investors across Europe. I'll start maybe a bit provocatively. Omnibus 1, a simplification, or as one of my actually colleagues and friends refer to as complexification package. Well, I think the objective of the Omnibus 1 initiative is indeed to make life for companies easier. I think currently, sorry for using the strong words, but I think we are living a little bit through the chaos. You know, everybody, including our members and their members, asking like, okay, what do we do? In Spain, actually, we have not really fully transposed CSRD yet, so we are still applying against, non-financial reporting directives. So what do we do? So many companies, even here, a gentleman from Ferrero that will be speaking in a moment, has also actually been telling the story about actually their company already preparing and having invested in sustainability reporting. And, honestly, this is, large investments we're talking about, right? Because let's not really forget that actually the largest companies already actually gone through the first year of reporting, which usually is the most costly one, because the companies, they have to do the first time materiality assessments, set up all the processes, prepare the IT systems. So actually the first year is always the most costly. And now we are telling all of these companies, well, actually we are changing. So I think this is, I would say a very difficult moment. At the same time, well, me representing here again the investors' voice, what the investors are concerned about, for the last 10 years, investors, including very mainstream ones, and really not even the ones interested in sustainability, have been calling for improved, comparable, and reliable sustainability-related disclosures. And well, this is actually why Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive has been adopted. And because, if we think about it, the predecessor of CSRD, so Non-Financial Reporting Directive, that has already required 10 years ago, companies actually to companies with more than 500 employees. So they're actually, the scope is actually, the threshold is much lower than now, actually, the proposed 1,000 employees threshold. Already required actually companies to report sustainability, at the time called non-financial information, and have been, already doing it for a while. But because there wasn't requirement actually to do these disclosures against one standard, it still did not resolve the matter of the fact that actually the information was not really truly comparable. Also, actually, investors needed more data, also from the companies which are smaller than those with 500 employees. So now I think it's a very particular moment because, sadly, we're actually backtracking on the progress we have done without really even having allowed this new law to actually bed in, which my recollection is has always been really the practice, to wait at least 2-3 years, since the law applies and then reassess. So right now, indeed, I think investors are also concerned, like, okay, on one hand side, I think it's very important that Draghi report has been mentioned, right? With the investment gap of around 800 billion annually, in order to meet actually the objectives of industrial decarbonization and competitiveness. But the issue is that, indeed, investors are supposed to also help close this gap, but how can they do so if they don't have the data? On top of that, now we actually, even a moment ago, just heard that actually with the value chain cap, they might be even prohibited from asking actually companies the data, which honestly I personally find a little bit shocking, and I think it dangerously starts to sound like the situation actually in US, where even the investors that actually do wish to consider ESG risks and other matters and embedded in the investments are actually prevented from doing so, which is actually impinging on the freedom of investment. So I think we're living in very, I would say, critical moment and very, I think, unprecedented situation, whereby I think everybody has very good intentions, but I'm afraid we might be actually going in the direction of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And indeed, I picked up, I think, on, how my fellow speakers also referred to actually removing 80% of companies from the scope of this directive, using very strong words, which I would fully concur with. I'm sorry, removing 80% of companies from the scope, this is massive. So, I would say, okay, fine, if we really want to strike the right balance, why don't we actually compromise at the 500 that, for instance, Non-Financial Reporting Directive said already 10 years ago? And so I think, and, of course, we can always hope that some companies will still be reporting on a voluntary basis. But I can also tell you that from the one-to-one discussions, we understand, unfortunately, that's not going to happen. Maybe some companies that have always been the front runners might be doing so. But unfortunately, I think a big number of companies have been admitting in those one-to-one discussions that if they're not going to be actually obliged, they're not going to do so. On top of that, for instance, here, the voluntary SME standard, and I can tell you, I have been actually following the development of the standard quite closely because until a year ago, I was also sitting on the EFRAG Sustainability Reporting Board. And basically, like the VSME standard was really created with the aim to serve as a standard for corner shop companies, SMEs, not for companies with up to 1,000 employees. So I think, if we really want to go in that direction, what we should be rather looking at is maybe either keeping or reviving and repurposing the listed SME standard, which at least has a structure which is much closer to the main standard, hence would also ensure much better comparability for investors. And also basically, is more meaningful, because actually the very SME standard is just kind of, a kind of not very long list actually of, I would say a couple of data points missing, a lot of very important ones. Maybe just one more point also here on the CSRD. So as you have all seen, the requirement, I would say here, the idea to develop sectorial standards has been removed, which, okay, fine, fair enough. But I think what is really needed is guidance for the sectorial disclosures, because what I think very often is forgotten about, actually the sectorial standards, they were supposed to be helpful for the companies from different sectors to help them identify which of the disclosures are most material to them. And I can also tell you that, even some of the very big players from the financial markets that are maybe not always seen, as the most progressive one, they have been also telling me, like, look, actually, we were supportive of the sectorial standards, maybe, a kind of a shorter, kind of a sector agnostic standard. But then indeed, sectorial disclosures, to make it clear which of those standards actually have to be disclosed. And maybe just very quickly, on the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, in particular on transition plans and climate targets. I mean, this is really one of the most important, I would say here, requirements, and an essential one really for EU to achieve its objective of industrial decarbonization. And basically, I think, it is very questionable why the requirement to implement the targets has been removed. I mean, well, we're already thankful that at least, I would say, the requirement to set the targets is still there, which is really essential. But, otherwise, okay, what's the point of setting the target if you don't implement it, right? So it's just basically opening the door to, window dressing and greenwashing, which the entire EU sustainable finance agenda has been actually trying, to prevent. And finally, also on the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, what is, I think, very particular is that this directive has been really developed and based on the international standards already very well recognized and known by many companies. So the OECD standards for multinational enterprises and also UN global guiding principles. And now, what we actually fail to understand, if really the objective is the simplification, why suddenly actually the changes make it actually this directive depart from that and also remove the risk-based approach, which is actually the main mechanism to ensure that actually this is not a tick box exercise and that actually it is feasible and implementable and not overly difficult.
1 minute.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Thank you so much. Also for keeping it in our time framework. I would propose that we go directly to the second panel. So please, a kind request to our speakers, bear with us for the Q&A session at the very end of this event. And we'll now go to the panel focusing on the business and civil society perspectives on the Omnibus Initiative. We'll have Marion Lupin, Senior Policy Officer at the European Coalition for Corporate Justice. We'll have Veronique Willems, Secretary General at SME United. Catherine Hayden, Director of Environment and Sustainability at Food Drink Europe. Aldo Cristiano, Head of Institutional Affairs and Sustainability at Ferrero, Germany. And Illa Brockmeyer, Head of Public Policy, EU and International Metro. I would say, please, Marion, if you could, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for having me here and allow me to represent civil society at this event. I will try to be brief. I will address two main concerns from civil society on the content of the Omnibus, specifically as it relates to the due diligence directive, and then make some more general comments. The first and main criticism, so to say, of the proposal would be that the proposed changes to the corporate due diligence value chain would limit obligations to primarily direct suppliers of company, the so-called tier one. While we understand that this may appear to simplify compliance at first glance, we also think that there are massive issues in terms of implementation. We know that this omnibus legislation, when it comes to the CSRD, was heavily inspired by an existing German law that has been into effect. So for that specific, we are able to have feedback from industry and companies that have had to implement it. And it has been clear in the 1-2 years since it has gone into effect that there is an issue with flooding direct suppliers with questionnaires and paperwork and request of compliance, specifically because we know for a fact that the most severe and the most concrete risks do not lie on tier one of the value chain, they lie much lower. We strongly believe that this proposed approach would lead to an overburdening of what can be considered lower risk suppliers, many of which also happen to be based in European countries, so would be subject to EU social and environmental standards already. So as in no way do we see that this decreases bureaucracy, that this decreases compliance burden. We just think that it forces company to focus it on the wrong place instead of giving them the flexibility that they need to assess where and prioritize, crucially, where my risk for my supply chain lie. There is the issue of liability, which is a massive issue from the perspective of civil society. The removal of a harmonized EU clause does nothing to simplify life for companies, will hamper victims in their request and their need to access justice after harm has been done, because they will have to navigate 27 different legal systems that would impose 27 different conditions under which you can or cannot be liable. And crucially, these national existing systems have proven recurrently insufficient to guarantee victims of corporate harm access to justice, which is an internationally recognized human rights and an obligation for member states to provide. In general, on the changes that are presented by this initiative that are often motivated with the need to reduce burden on SMEs and protect European SMEs and their competitiveness. We would like to remark again that the current CSDD as it exists provides ample measures in support, including but not limited to financial support for SMEs so that they are not overburdened with the cost of compliance. But I very strongly want to make the point that this is not just a theoretical benefit, something that is in the letter of the law. I mentioned before there are problems that are becoming evident in the application of the German legislation, and we have a group of over 15 German SMEs that has issued recently a call to the German government to implement these protections that are in the current version of the CSDD as a way to redress and remedy what is currently going wrong with the implementation of the German legislation, specifically when it comes to assistance and protection for SMEs. Where we do see issues in potential and we believe there is a need to act is on the prohibition for large companies in scope to pass down their obligations of compliance onto SMEs and onto lower suppliers. That is something that happens. It is something that needs to be addressed, and we call strongly on the Commission, but also the co-legislator to come out with an agreement soon so that this practice of dumping down obligation can be legally prohibited, thus protecting SMEs and posing the charge of compliance on large and wealthy multinationals that very much have the money to undertake these processes. In general, and on the SME burden argument, I think it bears repeating that SMEs themselves have come out in the past in support of CSDD for their own interest. We have the example of the Confederazione Nazionale dell'Artigianato, an Italian member of SME United, who said at the moment of the conclusion of the negotiation that legislation like the CSDD is crucial in ensuring a level playing field with other actors that may not be quite so responsible or front-running in terms of sustainability legislation. We have another example that is very relevant to this particular forum, the Organizzazione Interprofessionale del Pomodoro, for the non-Italian speaking people in this room, the tomato sauce project, where producers of tomatoes in the Italian agricultural industry have many times made the point on how global competition and an open market puts them in direct competition with actors that have no care about environmental or social standards. Triggering a race to the bottom now by diluting these obligations in social and environmental standard will do nothing to improve their competitiveness. It will bring them back to the same level of actors who are already way ahead of them in terms of production and competitiveness. CSDD is a crucial instrument to ensure a level playing field where first movers, where ambitious actors that have done work, and there is work being done on fair labor practices, fair wages, safe working conditions, safe environmental standards, it is crucial so that those first movers, those ambitious movers are not punished, but rather rewarded as first movers. I will conclude in saying there is one key message that I would like you to take from civil society today, and it is that competitiveness and sustainability simply cannot be seen as opposing force. They cannot be seen as obstacles to one another, because the only true form of competitiveness is one that is anchored in long-term sustainability. The accountability that we are looking for victims, for communities, for our environment, is an accountability that sees the harm being done now and brings acceptable answers to ensure, yes, competitiveness and a strong economy, but a real remediation of those harms. And crucially, a long-term prevention that in 20 years, the business as usual of now is a long forgotten practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marion. Let's now move to Veronique. Please, the floor is yours.
I thought there was some other speaker still ahead of me, if I understood the order well. Oh, okay, good. I don't know whether I still have to say something, because my neighbor actually said everything for SMEs, although I don't agree on everything. So, excuse me? I am very prepared. I would like to start by saying that we wouldn't have needed the omnibus if the think small first approach would have been applied from the start. And we'll continue advocating for this throughout all legislation that is being developed in Europe on all levels and on all topics. Because if you start working for the majority of companies in Europe, the 24.2 micro companies with less than 10 employees, instead of drafting legislation for the 43,420 large companies active in Europe, then we wouldn't have had this debacle. So that is my first point, and I think in that sense, I come very well prepared. What does that mean? That means that you develop legislation based on the capacity and the characteristics of the smallest ones, and you then add layers depending on requirements that are needed because of larger companies having a larger impact, being bigger in size and impact on the society. And in that way, you build a ladder, a development path for companies, rather than starting with the top of the mountain and expecting everybody to be able to jump on it immediately. So that's our first point. And in that way, we are also very grateful to the Commission that they have taken on board the concerns of the small companies who were neither in scope of the CSDDD nor of the CSRD, but in any case were demanded by the value chains to comply with those pieces of legislation. So we thank the Commission for now repairing the unintended impacts that have been created by the two legislations. I've already mentioned they have been impacted through the trickle-down effect in the supply chain. And that was another element that had to be corrected because in the impact assessments, that was not taken into account. And that's another element that we're advocating for in general, making sure that even though you do not put SMEs in the scope, that you take into account that indirectly they might be affected. And if you don't take them along in the impact assessment, you also immediately omit to develop measures for support and so on. So that's the second element in advance. Third element in advance, and that's my last one, and then I go a bit more in detail. Third element is whatever time of postponement, we don't care. What is crucial for us is that all the tools are ready to allow SMEs to prepare for compliance well in advance. So not 1 month, not 3 months, not 6 months, but at least 1 year for sure. Giving them the time to prepare for the new legislation. As has been said already a few times, there's a lot of one-off costs setting up a system, and that requires a small company owner with 2, 3, 4 employees who is working with their staff throughout the day to provide us with quality products and services. And in the evening, they start looking at what is the business development that I have to prepare for? What are the new rules that are coming my way? How am I going to comply with this? That all comes to that one person dealing with everything. And that one person needs tools and needs time to start implementing those tools in the company. So whether it's now 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 years, the tools have to be ready. And as of then, we start counting. On the CSRD, we are very happy that now the VSME has been put in place as the value chain cap for information. It's already been mentioned. We've been putting a lot of work, and SME United has been contributing since 2020 to the development. Is it already a good one? No, we still see room for improvement. Is it feasible? Maybe, if we develop the right tools and if we now start working with stakeholders, with our SME organizations on the ground, to develop the tools, to develop the training, to develop the support for those SMEs, for those entrepreneurs, to really start preparing for the implementation. Linked to that, we also asked the Commission to now endorse the VSME as soon as possible. And we understand that you've decided to postpone the public consultation as long as the current legislative process is going on. Our SMEs now need certainty on where they have to navigate to. So that's, I think, a very important element. Secondly, the exclusion of the mid-caps. I've already said it, exemptions for us is not simplification. Exemptions for us is not a solution because you still have the trickle-down effect. So you're correcting that now with the, nevertheless, for the future, please think small first, act accordingly, and start building up. The limit to the possibility to ask for assurance is a very important element for us as well. We do not want our SMEs to be confronted with additional costs of audits for something that they are legally not even required to provide. So on that perspective, for SMEs, we really want to have the insurance that assurance will not be needed. It's already provided for in certain transpositions in national law. So I think that could be also a source of inspiration towards the future. Looking at the CSDDD, again, SMEs are out of scope. Nevertheless, we've heard many small companies already who were confronted, and you've mentioned it already, with large companies putting in place a sustainability contract that they had to sign to comply with certain elements. This is not feasible. What we do support is more harmonization and also limiting to tier. I think there we completely disagree. I agree with your example on the flooding of the companies in the tier 1, but I think it's also flooding tier 2 to tier 3. Our basic remark is, in Europe, we have a legislative framework in place. When you comply with that legislative framework, you shouldn't be doing any reporting. I now have examples of entrepreneurs who had to say, yes, I do not do child labor. Yes, I do not do slavery. It's a bit like the ESTA going to the US. No, I am not a terrorist. For those entrepreneurs, it's like they're being laughed at in their face, because of course they are not doing slavery. Of course they are not doing child labor, because if they would be doing that according to European laws, they would be in jail. So replacing market authorities ensuring of compliance by making companies comply with each other is not the right way forward for us. Tier 1 would ensure that the direct contact, that you ensure that there are sustainable practices, and then you trickle down as well. So we would like to see it from a positive angle. On taxonomy, I would like to highlight the simplified approach that has been agreed in the Sustainable Finance Platform, which gives a lot of advantages and opportunities now, again, to build up for a small company towards sustainable finance criteria. And on CBAM, we are happy that there is a huge simplification. So that's a first reaction. We are still consulting our members more in detail, but I think also going into the technical details here would lead us too far. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Katrin, now the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Yes, thank you for the invitation to represent Food Drink Europe here to the table. I would like to start with giving you a little bit of context. So what are we talking about in the food and drink industry? The food and drink is Europe's largest manufacturing industry, just a little reminder on that. Also, the EU food drink industry is the largest exporter on food and drinks worldwide. And well, maybe some very few numbers here. The food and drink industry in Europe employs 4.7 million people, generates a turnover of 1.2 trillion euro, and around 3/4 of the EU's food and drink products are actually delivered to within the single market, while again, as I said before, the world's largest exporter on food and drink. So what's specific also to our sector? We have been striving for sustainable and resilient food systems already for quite a while, before the Green Deal even came up. And we are one of the first sectors, as the supply chain is very much linked to farming products and agriculture, one of the first to also suffer from climate impact and environmental impacts. So that's why there's a high interest in keeping us all on the right journey here. Another specific thing about our sector, the value chain is quite diverse. So it starts with the farmers, goes to the food and drink industry, which again comprises small and medium-sized enterprises, micro enterprises, and large companies, both EU-based and US-based. Then goes over to the retailers and finally to the consumers. So it's quite a complex value chain. Before the Omnibus came out, so we have been following this with high interest in looking at particular what does it mean for the food and drink industry. We came up pre-launch, let's say, with a few key principles, but I will just maybe in a nutshell. So we basically said that we fully support the objectives of the CSRD, the CSRD, and the EU taxonomy. And we are committed really to use these tools to help us go this transition towards sustainable and resilient food systems. So to go the next steps on this. To doing so in a business-friendly way, which we hope the Omnibus will be bringing. And also that it should be a smart and targeted simplification, not a complete, as we heard here before, but a simplification process that really targets what needs to be simplified for industry. So now post-Omnibus, we basically, as I said, our membership is quite diverse. So we looked in terms of what are the risks and the opportunities that we see from the different perspectives, as we really need to outweigh and balance them and consider them hopefully in the design process of this Omnibus proposal. So overall risks, I quickly run through major 5 risks that we see. It depends on how it will be designed. It could be jeopardizing the ambition level of the legislations mentioned, so on the sustainability transition of companies. It depends really on how this will be done so that there is still a meaningful measurement and monitoring possible for companies. Second point is how to keep track on the supply chain. So how to keep track on risks and decarbonization along the supply chain if the data provisions are limited to only large companies that are in scope of this new legislation. So again, it needs to be discussed how that will be taken care of. And there's a critical link also then both for SMEs and for the larger on how this will be dealt with, both for CSRD and CSDDD. So CSDDD, you only have tier 1 reporting, and both of them, you have only the larger companies with the mandatory reporting. How will that play out in practice? So will that really be an advantage then for the smaller ones? Will we get all necessary data? I think there needs to be some discussion and maybe an impact assessment on how that could be realized in practice to see that it's working. So that's the goal, I guess. A third risk is the uncertainty and unpredictability of the changing, as this is an precedent. This is the first omnibus. So does that mean that existing legislation will be changed? What does that mean for investment decisions? We also had there before, there is some uncertainty. So really certainty is important. And for companies that already invested in compliance measures, rowing back now and costs already invested, this is also a problem that needs to be addressed in some way. Opportunity now. So simplification and reducing administrative burden, very welcome. Across the board, I think there's a high demand for that. Then for companies that are not yet on this journey and are part of wave 2 or 3 or not yet prepared, there's also the chance for the process to be more streamlined and to be more targeted, so less of an effort. Then the opportunities for companies under the threshold to not be obliged to report, but to do so with this voluntary report if they want to and not be asked further information. So could be an advantage for these companies. There is a big opportunity that we see in the alignment between the different legislations, because there was a lack of alignment between CSRD, CSDDD, specifically in terms of scope of companies, in terms of terms used like minimum wage and another term in another. So adaptation of the timelines and of the scopes, very welcome to make it easier altogether. And then the delay, stop the clock, welcome certainly by those not yet in the race, and also in terms of getting clarity and certainty. So that links then to our key demands. I limited to the three key demands that we have. We would like to urge the European lawmakers to provide legal clarity as soon as possible. And yeah, you hear that a lot, but it's also really super important. A clear timeline, and both for the EU and also the member state implementation, because in some member states there is already legislation in place. So there also needs to be clarity on how will that be adapted in this process. Our sector sees the urgency to continue the actions on climate change, and we remain fully committed to that in our broader sustainability journey. So this should still be the objective, we hope. And we really want to be sitting at the table. So involvement of stakeholders in how this design is being made to address these issues that I raised before. I only raised a few, there are more. So to really discuss that it is designed in a way that makes it simpler and easier and keeps us on our journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, I'll give the floor to Aldo, please.
So thank you so much, and also delighted to be here and grateful to the organizer for having me here. And let's speak about the business perspective, or better, from a confectionery company perspective, which is operating in a responsible way when it comes to sourcing and sustainable supply chain. Now, the Omnibus proposal has 4 pieces of legislation, and 2 are for us of immediate operational impact. And those 2 are the reporting directive and the due diligence. On the first one, my neighbor just said it, the reporting obligation for a private company like ours is pretty new, and therefore we have been putting in substantial investment to comply with. But this is a different type of impact when it comes to the Omnibus overall for us as a sustainable and responsible supply chain actor. For us, it's more critical, the due diligence part. The due diligence part and the way we are doing business when it comes to palm oil or cocoa, which is obviously a key ingredient in our supply chain, is to proactively manage human rights and environmental issues in supply chains. And how do we do this? I just want to give you a short and a quick overview. Is the starting point are our suppliers. In our company, we have 20,000 and more suppliers which you need to tackle. And in order to ensure that you have a responsible sourcing commitment, you need obviously, first of all, to look in such a supplier code approach. What are the human rights and social practices? What are the environmental protection which we need to guarantee? And how do we get fair and sustainable supply chains in order to mitigate potential issues? Because they are there, we know this, we are operating in areas which are poor countries, and we need obviously to tackle these issues. And to give you just a very quick insight is, if you have thousands of suppliers, you need to classify them. Ideally, you classify them in high, medium, low risk suppliers. And therefore, you need obviously to see the higher the risk is, the more you need to go deep into the supply chain. So we cannot stop at tier 1 when we see that suppliers are in areas which are of high risk. So that's why I want to make the point on tier 1, and I come later to the Omnibus proposal to stress this point a bit deeper. In all of this, when you start to classify suppliers, you do a risk analysis, right? You need to understand whether by spending or by critical areas, where are the risks? And you need, if you have a supplier code, make sure that your suppliers are in compliance, right? In order to do this, you do either assessments, you have service provider like EcoVadis, for instance, or you do your own audits. The deeper you go through the supply chain, the higher the risk is, the deeper you need to have. And in the end, you need to have an approach which is we call it a mitigation program. And the mitigation program means that you're not going to leave the small suppliers or the small tier 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever the depth is of a supply chain alone. You need to work with them together. So it's not just an exercise of taking the supplier code and signing it, as we have heard it today. It is more a collaborative activity together with your supply chain actors, because we need to ensure that deep down the road, we get a supply chain which is sustainable. Right? And to give you a bit of experience is that we do around 100 to 200 audits in our supply chain, down on the ground, in order to understand how much compliance or how much the mitigation programs are working and having impact. And the logic of all of this is to have a system of control, or we call it also an effort-driven approach, rather to have, call it, final product approach or an end result-driven approach. Because important in all of this, and this is very difficult, and we have a lot of experience in how to tackle really supply chains which are at high risk, you need to have a system of continuous improvement. That is crucial. You cannot switch on, switch off by legislation that suddenly you get everything done. Okay, that is really a learning which we have gone through the past years. And that's why we have seen that approach has brought over the years higher compliance, better ratings of our suppliers, tier 2, 3, 4. So that shows there is a model of a risk-based approach, which is part of the business. It's integrated in the business, and you need to do it. And you cannot stop on. You need to have that kind of approach in order to go through. But let me come quickly back of the critical elements of the proposal. We've been hearing tier 1, we've been hearing civil liability. And from my perspective, as I explained it, for us, it's naturally that we go beyond tier 1. Because based on the risk assessment, you need to go through. You cannot shut your eyes and say, there's a piece of paper, I've signed it. You need to go through if you are a responsible business. And when it goes beyond, we can't do it alone. Our suppliers, sub-suppliers, sub-sub-suppliers, we need to have clarity, and we've heard the word a few times today, what it means to engage smaller companies, right? At the moment, there are some ideas when smaller companies should or should not. There are ideas of exemption. We've been hearing exemption today a few times, but rather than exemption, it's better to have a tool for them to come up and to help to make the supply chain more compliant to what the expectations are. So we've heard it before from one of the speakers that rather than exemption, it's better to have a tool for them and to help them. On the civil liability, I think it is extremely important that we have credible systems, right? Credible systems when it comes to civil liability, but in a sense that we have a certain balance. And what do I mean by a certain balance? On one side, we need to have a credible system when it comes to liability. On the other side, obviously, we don't need to go into a kind of litigation environment. We cannot always come up with litigation one day after the other. We need to have a nice balance between the two of them, right? And that is something which we see in a pragmatic harmonization that we can achieve it, right? What is also not in favor of businesses throughout Europe is to have different liability systems in different countries. If you have Germany with the LKSG, if you have France, if you have other countries, we need to have a harmonized system, which is helpful and gives again a certain assurance, a certain way of planning and having for a company, obviously, something which is clear. At the end, clarity is something which we need. And therefore, the discussion about guidelines, the discussion about, it's an acronym which I always get difficult to spell it, VSME, where you need to have, and I think work being done and will be gone further. When is the moment of clarity where smaller companies need, whether they are lower than 1,000, lower than 500, but need to come up and to collaborate in a way that we can mitigate the risk and we can get rid of the risk and we can have remediation in order to have, again, it's all about a responsible, long-term, sustainable supply chain, right? And that's why it's pretty important at the end of the day, and I want to close with the thinking of having a pragmatic approach, right? A pragmatic and feasible approach which allows at the end of the day, the so-called spirit of the UN guiding principle to comply with the spirit, right? And the spirit is to improve step by step. Ideally, the steps should be quicker than some might think, in order to achieve really a fair and a sustainable supply chain. And that's important that we get a legislation where we are able to commit to have a level playing field and to make the turnaround of supply chain, which today are not acceptable.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And now we move to the very last speaker in our panel. Ila, please, the floor is yours.
Hi. So my name is Ila, as already said. I work for Metro. I also prepared a presentation. I hope it can be shared. And I just wanted to give a very brief overview. You can go to the next slide, please, of Metro, just so you understand also the dimensions of our company. And when it comes to the reductions in scope that we have heard about, we are basically not really impacted because we are such a large company. So what is Metro? Metro is an international food wholesale company, and our customers are mainly in the hotel, restaurant, and catering industry. So not here in Belgium, but in a lot of other European countries, in 16 overall. If you go to a restaurant, there's a high chance that you might be, I don't know, drinking coffee with Rioba sugar, for example. That's one of our own brands. And we are, as I said, not only present in 16 EU countries, but overall in over 30 countries worldwide. And we can go to the next slide, please. And the next one as well, again, because I think we are a bit short on time. So just exactly a brief, very brief overview of our sustainability strategy, because of course at Metro also sustainability reporting and sustainability management didn't start with the legislation that we have now seen coming from Brussels, but we had our strategy already before. And here you see the current 3 main pillars. The first one is climate and carbon. The second one is ethics and trust. And the third one is diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think most of the people here are expert on these topics, so I don't have to explain that in detail, but I just wanted to give this as a kind of introduction before I dive into the actual topic. So now to the next slide. Essentially, we welcome the proposals from the Omnibus proposal. However, as I already said, we are in all of the 3 pieces of legislation that you see here, not really impacted by the reduction in scope, but we are still in favor because we see good improvements on content suggested that we hope will also be followed through. And the first one is considering the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. We are really welcoming the plans to simplify the data collection, then also the plans to stay away from sector-specific standards, and also the plans to stick to limited assurance. And just to explain why data complexity, I singled out one aspect of the CSRD, which is difficult for us or the most challenging for us to implement, which is the fact that there is just a really big amount of data to be collected, potentially over 1,000 data points. I think right now we are at about 550 data points. And the issue that we see is that it's a really detailed level of granularity, which is very prescriptive, and it's very difficult to adapt it to your own business operations. So to give an example, Metro is a trading company, not a retailer, but a wholesaler. So comparison to Ferrero, we also have to disclose, for example, when it comes to manufacturing and production processes, but we actually don't own them. So for us, it's very hard to say, to provide data on, let's say, the energy mix or measures in the value chain or whatever when it comes to the products that we sell in our stores when we are not a producer. And also the level of detail when it comes to the data points that we have to collect. To give you an example, for example, when it comes to the energy mix, we have to provide information on emission, for example, on 2 different levels. When it comes to emissions, for example, in Germany, then we have to not only provide data on the emission that is calculated on the market, but we also have to give it very specifically for the location. So basically, we have to report double on the energy mix. So just to give an idea of why we think it's a really valid point to look at the data complexity that's being reported on, because there is a lot to be done in future to make, to reduce just the amount of data that has to be reported. And then looking on at taxonomy, it's very similar to CSRD. Happy to see efforts to reduce complexity and to simplify, because it's just a matter of fact that the criteria are super complicated. And I mentioned here one example. We are investing in energy efficient cooling systems. for an amount of 82 million euros, which is quite a high amount of investment, but we cannot declare it as taxonomy aligned. And the issue that we see with that is that the reporting criteria are so strict that it really paints a kind of distorted image of our sustainability investment and our sustainability strategy and what the company is actually doing to become more sustainable. And last but not least, coming to the CSRD, here we welcome the planned delays in the implementation and also the content changes. And what I want to highlight here again, also referring to what I said earlier, the complexity in our value chain is really unique. And we always like to say we think we shouldn't talk about value chains, but we should rather talk about a tree, because the chain kind of says that everything is connected. But for us, since we are traders, we are buying and selling, it's very difficult for us to really trickle down, to really reach the end of the value chain that we have also talked about, where, as we all know, really the most work needs to be done. And at the same time, it's also very difficult for our remediation measures, for example, to really to reach the, let's say, worker on some kind of in some kind of production site, and for that person to be able to understand about Metro and to understand what his or her possibilities are for remediation. So we think it's very important that when looking at the CSRD, this Tier 1 discussion also takes into account that there are different kinds of business models. And since wholesale retail are not companies that are directly producing, we think it's very important that you can also differentiate between Tier 1 and beyond. And then I have one more slide. So we think in this process that will take a while, now we have 4 kind of guiding principles, as we call them, that we think should guide the way forward. One is we really argue for harmonization as much as possible across the EU. As I said, we are in 16 EU countries. Yes, it does matter if you have to implement one standard or 27 different standards. That in our case, that's 16. So connected to that, we also really call for consistency, because, for example, there are definitions that differ between the pieces of legislation. We think it's really important to look that also EUDR, for example, is connected to these pieces of legislation that we just talked about. Information sharing, we've also discussed that today already, and there is this proposal for a value cap. I can just again say from our perspective, since we really depend on others providing us with information, for us it's very difficult to obtain the information if there is no obligation to disclose. So somehow we need to reach a compromise here where it doesn't end in suppliers just having to sign pieces of paper, but us needing the information also, because we are not the ones that actually produce the product that we are selling. And last but not least, we just always also want to emphasize, like, what is the actual result that you are trying to achieve, and should always be kept in mind if, for example, really on CSRD, does reporting on so many nitty-gritty details really improve the situation? We're not really sure. We're not saying we're not against reporting, but there is definitely more efficiency to be created. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this point, I would like to open the floor for questions, and I would also like to invite MEPs, if they do have any specific questions, to our speakers. Please don't be shy. Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Julia Gizewski from the German Confectionery Association, BDSI. 90% of our members are SMEs. This is why I, first of all, thank you for your very valuable input. I would have two remarks. The most important topics in this room today, Tier 1 and the value chain cap. And the question would be to Simon, Alexandra, Marion, and Aldo. Not all of you have to answer, but I would be interested in some of your opinions, because we only talked about one part of the draft, I suppose. So we do not have to stop by Tier 1, and we don't have to stop with the value chain cap. In the draft, it is already mentioned that it is a risk-based approach. So meaning when it comes to the limitation of the due diligence obligations to the direct business partners, it already says, except where plausible indications of risk in the broader supply chain exist. And if you check the recital number 21, it is explained what exactly is a plausible indication. And there we have, again, the risk-based approach, like in the German law. And there are some examples, like if there are reports from media, reports from NGOs, if there are mentioning in the grievance mechanism or other knowledge, then you have to go deeper into the chain. So it's already in the draft. And the same is for the value chain cap. It goes for the CSRD as well as for this triple D. Of course, it's the starting point, the VSME plus, or the delegated act, which will be elaborated by the EU Commission. For example, for the CSRD, if there is no other possibilities for companies who are falling under the CSRD, if there's no other possibility to get this information, the supplier will be obliged to help to get this information, and the same goes for the CSDDD. If there is this restriction to the value to the VSME, the value chain cap, unless necessary, because the standard does not cover the relevant information the supplier or the big company needs. So what's your opinion on that? Because I think there is already this risk-based approach in the draft, and I think it would be maybe helpful to just get more information about what exactly are plausible information and what exactly is the situation where you are, where you have the right to get more information than the VSME. Thanks a lot.
A very extensive question. Please, whoever would like to start. Timon, I see.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Basically echoing the room a little bit, because it was said before. So yeah, if you look at the UN guiding principles, the OECD framework, yeah, it's not enough to stop at Tier 1. That's apparent. And it's also good practice not to do that, because actually a lot of companies, if they see signals, and signals being indeed media reports, NGOs, local suppliers, etc., they need to act, right? So in that sense, well, it's great that a risk-based approach is entailed in the draft, but it does feel a little bit like a step back to only stop at Tier 1. You know, I've worked in the coffee industry for about 12 years. The risks do not occur at Tier 1, right? And that has been echoed by my friends from the cocoa value chain. So yeah, we need to be realistic there. So I think that's one part of the question. I'll yield the floor to others as well.
Wait, do you want first? No, I just want to also echo on the Tier 1 and on the, let's say, on the challenge overall. You see, on one side, we need to have a bit of flexibility. That's a bit what in the new language is also brought up. And on the other side, we heard today a few times, legal certainty is important, right? And exactly in the concept of the plausible information, you see the flexibility on one side and the need to specify better what it means. What means an objective, let's say, incidents or an objective information? Is it coming out of a grievance mechanism? Is it coming out from a report, from a journalist, from an NGO, from whatever type of investigation, which is obviously has to be objective? And I think in the German Supply Chain Act, it is spelled out pretty well. So you have certainty, clarity on one side, and obviously a bit of flexibility, because you can't run behind every allegation that somebody has seen somewhere which might not be even the truth. So you need to have that specification or specifying of that so-called plausible information idea. And I think that is something that is maybe being defined now. I'm not so sure, but I think it could be very helpful to bring in that level of clarity, right?
Thank you. Marion, please.
Thank you for the question. I think it's very on point. As with many things, when it comes to this legislation, this topic, the answer also depends on who is answering it. If I put myself in the shoes of a company perspective, I very much echo what has just been said. There's an issue of legal certainty. What does plausible mean? Who needs to receive that information? Does it need to be the CEO? To be a certain set of people within the company? What is plausible? Do you have a reasonable delay between knowing and acting? So that all requires legal certainty, which in my opinion is not there at the moment in the current draft. Stepping back into a more civil society perspective, we are highly critical of this proposal, and we have been critical also towards its version in the German legislation, because de facto you can make the argument that it turns civil society, organization, trade unions a little bit into watchdogs and shifts the burden of enforcement beyond tier 1 on producing reports, investigations, etc. And yeah, that's not exactly the role that civil society is supposed to play, at least not in the context of this legislation. So we are also critical in that respect.
Okay, and Alexandra, please.
Well, I think I just fully agree with my fellow speakers, and maybe just to say that, from my experience, I think I've seen so many times the cases where actually certain important bits were included in recitals, and actually then they were kind of a little bit forgotten. And the problem is that actually recitals, they have no legal value. I mean, they just kind of explain. So actually, all the important provisions, they should be in the text. And then the question is like, indeed, companies applying it, will they actually read the recitals and really properly understand? Maybe they and also some of them, they might be actually just shield themselves, because look, I think there are really a lot of good companies and great guys, like Ferrer, for instance, trying to really do their, good job, and some others. But, there are also the companies, that might just approach it as a kind of, compliance exercise. And actually, they might be even using then this kind of provision, saying like, oh, you see, we don't have to go beyond that. So yeah, we're not going to do that. And maybe they will not even dive into the recitals.
Thank you. Any other questions? If I may direct a question perhaps to the Commission on the timeline. What are your expectations as regards how efficiently these proposals could be fast-tracked?
What I think in the Council, good progress is being made on the stop the clock proposal when it comes to the CSRD. And we are hopeful that the process will be speedy also on the content directive, so that we can have an agreement this year. In the meantime, I think, and to come back to a point which was made by SME United, we may want to adopt a recommendation on the VSME standard, to transpose the VSME standard as it is now, to give legal certainty to SMEs. And once the legislation, I'm talking about the CSRD here, is adopted, then we would get back to the delegated act, notably on the VSME standard, to make sure that it is consistent with the level 1 text that has been agreed. So everything goes well, negotiations and wrapping up the negotiations this year, and very quickly afterwards, the delegated act for the SME standard. And then we'll need a little bit more time to finalize the ESRS standard, and there we're waiting for input from EFRAG, of course. So that will take a little bit more time into next year normally.
Any other questions? Please do take advantage of the fact that we have a very wide array of speakers. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So my name is Jimena. I represent the European Flavor Association, so the industry that creates the flavorings that go into the food. And I know we do not have a crystal ball here, but I was wondering if maybe the MEPs will have a better understanding of what are the chances of the legislation being approved also at the Parliament, and what happens if there's not an agreement, and then what will be the role of the Commission then? Thank you.
This is a very important time that we are discussing about several topics. So what about the implementation? We are at the beginning. We try to have a clear approach about the amendments and what we can change, if change is to make, because now I understand that from the discussion we have different opinions. So it's better than if we read exactly, make a clear opinion about the topic, because it is very difficult to understand if we are doing the right thing. Also because when we speak about simplification, we all agree, but the meaning is this one. So what about balance, small and medium enterprises, the big, the distribution? So if you ask me what's the chance to approve, simply, we can approve. But if we ask me how we can change, this is a very little bit difficult. So if we can join in clear way how to amend, how we can improve, how we can implementation, or we change, this is a little bit difficult to have an answer, but it is clear for me that it is the need to go. Okay.
Thank you very much. Maybe one last question. Okay, I see none. Oh, Nick, go ahead.
Yes, hello. My name is Nick Donheim from Eurocommerce, representing European retailers and wholesalers. So Metro is, for example, one of our members, and I think we can only echo that what Ila said about the really unique position our members have in the retail wholesale sector. And because we have this unique position, I think one question always comes up: how do we engage with a lot of these suppliers? And if there's maybe a way beside standards and legislation to have common, be it tools or platforms, and it's maybe a chance for the European Commission or the member states to step in. And I know DG FISMA had 2 conferences last year to bring also these initiatives that are there now at member state level, also to help small companies in order to support them. And I think also SME United mentioned the tools that need to be developed. So is there maybe beside legislation also something that needs to be looked at, be it a platform where everyone can connect data, and then maybe applying the only once principle, then maybe several large companies that have the same supplier can then get the information there, and the small SME supplier only needs to upload once. Yes, and I think the general spirit of harmonization, standardization, and as CSRD is still relatively new and the first companies are now reporting, I think we are still at the beginning of this process, and there are a lot of people out there thinking about this, but maybe that's the last question to raise.
And to whom did you want to direct your question to?
I think probably the Commission, but also we have Ferrero and SME United, for example.
No, I think it's early days. I agree that we should not only look at establishing rules. We need to make sure that they can be implemented in an easy and efficient way. And we need to be able to guide notably SMEs in doing that. The sectorial standards were there to help also. So now they're out of the picture. So we need to see what we do to make sure that companies can easily implement what they have to do. I think we have an open mind. I mean, we've been consulting a lot on these matters recently. I think the process will continue. We have a little bit more time now with the stop the clock proposal, which is likely to be adopted. So we should use that time in order to see how we can indeed ease implementation and make it as efficient as possible. And I'm sure we'll have opportunities to discuss the matter.
Anything to add? Please, Veronique.
Thank you. Yeah, I think indeed it's going to be crucial. As I mentioned already before, stop the clock is great, but we shouldn't now take the time to think too long and again arrive too late with the support tools. It's going to be crucial that we roll out. I'm thinking about what happened with GDPR. Half of Europe was going crazy. There were several consultants who earned a shitload of money on the back of our SMEs. And I've already did last year when I was in a panel at EFRAG, and I might better not say this because I might be dead in a few months then, but over my dead body, this is going to happen again. We put in place rules. We also have to ensure the tools. We have several organizations in our membership who are already looking in how they can support their SMEs. It's going to be crucial that Commission now also has a look, that we ensure outreach, that we ensure that we get best practices up, and that we can do an outroll throughout Europe to make sure that we don't create again an aversion towards the European Union. Because I remember when we had entrepreneurs discussing on CSRD, CSDDD, that one of the things that was put forward was we have always been strong advocates of the European Union. But if you want us to turn against, then please continue in this way. And that's the last thing that I want to have as an organization, the last thing that entrepreneurs want. I think that's the last thing that Europe needs at the moment. So we have to make sure that we can provide the support that they need if they have to report, that they can do it in an easy way, that they have sufficient time to put it in place. It's not just providing a few data. To get those data, you need to put in place a whole system of collecting those data, storing those data, being able to report on those data. And that's not like in the 80s with the shoebox with the invoices. That time has been long gone. And that's really something that we need to get here. Talking about a lot of things that we want companies to provide, we need to make it practical and feasible for them to do so.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, at this point, before I leave the floor to Pietro Fiocchi for the closing remarks, I just wanted to thank you everybody for being here with us. Thank you to the presenters, speakers. Thank you for your questions. I would like to remind you that in case you want to join the European Food Forum on our future discussions, please do contact Luisella Ciani, who's here with us, or write to her an email at info@europeanfoodforum.eu. The next EFF meeting is going to take place already on the 25th of March. And it's going to be titled Empowering Consumers and Business in the Green Transition, Navigating EU Policy on Green Claims. So very much looking forward to seeing you there. And now with the ball swimming in the European Parliament's court, I would like to invite our honorable member of the Parliament to close these discussions. Please. The floor is yours.
First of all, I have to admit that Veronique was very well prepared. No, jokes aside, this is an extremely difficult topic because in the last legislation, the Parliament came out and the Commission came out with a lot of regulation and directives which were extremely ideological and Taliban, and they didn't look at the matter of economy, jobs, and so on. One for all, the limitation on pesticides, which applies to the European producers, but not to the extra European producers, so that I can buy corn from Canada where they use 2.5 times the phytopharmacs in their production, so they double their production rate per acre, put it on a ship, travel 7,000 kilometers emitting CO2, then 1,000 kilometers emitting CO2, and it comes to Milano and at a cost which is lower than what we can produce locally. So, my opinion, the Commission has some things to fix because they didn't realize how much damage they did to our own production, to our own culture, to our own habits and historical things. Other than that, in reality, you were mentioning the Omnibus on simplification. Which was, in my opinion, a very positive approach, but it was not sufficient because there are still a lot of sector, not only your sector, but which has an incredible amount of bureaucracy and cost to follow the European rule. It was a step in the right direction, that's what I can say. But, remember also that, and I don't want to depress you, that there are a lot of regulation and directives which are going to affect your life. Let's start from, the PPWR, the packaging, the CLP, which, for example, I was a shadow rapporteur on CLP, but they wanted to add mandatory information regarding gender equality, animal welfare, CO2 emission in 27 different languages, and they did not accept the concept of using a QR code because they said that not every European citizens had a telephone, which for me was ridiculous, but whatever. Luckily, they didn't do that because otherwise you should have done a book like this for every product you are producing and selling in the distribution system. I do understand that the omnibus on simplification is something, but not enough on taxonomy regulation. But again, remember also that and this is very difficult to understand, but will come on your shoulder also the CBAM, ETS, deforestation, and all those regulations, which are going to be tough for the European producer and transformers and distribution system, because I had a talk with the Commission regarding, luckily they postponed, for example, deforestation, but the idea was that the European importer of any type of vegetable goods from South America, from whatever, had to certify that the production was not done with deforestation. And it was like, so I asked, how do you do that? We can give you the utilization of a satellite so you can, it's like, I imagine not a small industry, I'm talking about a micro industry. The idea is this guy looking at a satellite who find that is importing ananas from Costa Rica and that was not causing deforestation, killed me because it's over my head. But Anyway, there are a lot of problems. We are aware of it. We are fighting this legislation on a moderately optimistic note is a little more pragmatic. So I think we can fix a lot of strange things that we did the last legislation. Don't be shy. Come to me, come to Elena. I'm Vice President of Envy, she's Vice President of ITRE, and we work like maniacs. So bring us the problem in a very clear and easy way, and we'll try to solve it. So that's it. Thank you for coming here, because in my opinion, this is a treasure that we have in Europe. The food, the transformation, our culture, and everything else. So we need to do everything we can do to preserve it. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Donatan, would you like to add something?
No, just thanks for you. And I think that my colleague has put the stress about what for us is food. Some keywords: impact, because we need to have an assessment as clear as we can. Certainty, because all the time we change the regulatory, maybe we are not simplifying, but the contrary. And third word is balanced, because we have to take together different interests. So as my colleague Fiocchi has said, we are here to understand better as we can. We have a result that is very precious for us to give us the correct information, and thank you for your presence here. Thank you.